Well, so Sarah covered a lot of stuff, including introducing me already, so I won't do that. Other than I'm Bernie, I'm from the other side of the lake, and we need to stand together because we have a common problem up on the lake. This is a fairly technical presentation. I'm going to keep it to the highlights on this, but I think it's important that you understand some of the technical backdrop, much of what Sarah was talking about. Repeating something that Sarah said, but it's worth repeating. It's a fact that Lake Erie is at record high and that we broke records with rain and snow in 2017 and 19. The IJC in Plan 2014 did not bring water to the lake. Mother Nature did. To the lake and to the Ottawa River. Plan 2014 is an outflow plan, not an inflow plan. So we need to redirect the focus on how outflow is managed and not just talk about the record inflow. It's all about balance. There is no magical plan that will eliminate all flooding. We're not asking for it. It's not reasonable. It's not doable. We're asking for a plan that does not unfairly extend and worsen the injury to Lake Ontario. The injury needs to be equitably balanced. Everybody needs to suffer at the same level. And the last point here, and this is an important one because it keeps coming up, we would have had flooding with Plan 58D as well. We can argue about whether that's 3 inches less or not, but we would have had flooding in both 2017 and 2019. So this is not about replacing one plan with another. This is about having the plan that we have and making sure that it's balanced for everybody. Some definitions, because this gets confusing, and I use terms interchangeably, and I really shouldn't. I'm going to try not to, but downstream is everything that's past the Moses Saunders Dam. Montreal, which is often used as downstream, Montreal is really only part of it. There are towns and lakes beyond Montreal that are affected by this as well. So even when we talk about the effluent, we need to consider not just Lake St. Louis, but also the regions downriver from that. Upstream includes all of Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River down to Messina and Cornwall. All right, so here's where I think Plan 2014 is imbalanced. Plan 2014 uses the effluent to protect downstream during spring Ottawa River crest. Sarah's already covered that. The fact that the effluent exists makes a lot of sense, and I'll point that out in a second quite clearly. The effluent allows an unlimited reduction in Moses Saunders Dam outflow. So when we cut back Moses Saunders Dam outflow in April and May to accommodate the Ottawa River, to accommodate Montreal from flooding from the Ottawa River, we're actually cutting outflow from Lake Ontario below pre-project flow rate, meaning below natural levels, below what would have happened before the Moses Saunders Dam was built. As a result, downstream receives a benefit that is significantly above minimum required by Plan 2014, because the intent there is, at minimum, natural protection, and this directly results in an injury to upstream riparian interests. So let me go through some of the data. So just for clarification, this line right here, the orange line, this is Lake Ontario level, starting January 1, 2017, going through all of 17, then into all of 18, and then finally through all of 19, through to December 31st, 2019. I'm plotting Lake Ontario level in meters. So the left-hand side, we go into 2017, something below 75 meters, and then finish over here at something at 75.5 or so. No, it's 75.75. I'm better with feet. This is the pre-project correlation that's in Plan 2014. This was done by Rob Caldwell and David Fay, and I was curious. I checked the correlation with data that I had at hand, and that correlation is correct. So when the IJC publishes the number that says this is what the lake would have been before we built the seaway, they're actually correct. So the argument here is not about whether or not we're receiving a benefit, because we are. It's about an equitable sharing of the pain during high water supply periods like we're in right now. And in my opinion, and based on my analysis, Plan 2014 does not accomplish equitable flood sharing. So this is pre-project, which means no seaway, no Moses Saunders Dam. The green line at the bottom here, that just came up on the screen, is the current channel capacity. And mind you, both of these lines are for illustrative purposes. They are not absolutely correct. I don't consider ice, I don't consider vegetation. So as you get into the technical details, the numbers will shift a little bit, but not massively so. For the purposes of this presentation, they're good. So the green line is the current channel capacity. That's if you open the dam completely, you shut down shipping, and you flood Montreal. But everything is wide open. This is the theoretical bottom. And the reason this is worth bringing up is A, where's the bottom? And B, if you take a look at 2019, this point right here, 75.8 meters, or 74.8 meters rather, that's the bottom that we could have reached. It is not physically possible with the current system to get any lower than that. So I'm going to do this in feet. There are people on this side of the lake that make the argument that we should never get the lake above 244 feet. The reality is that's not physically possible. You cannot get enough water through the dam to make that happen. And that's really the point here. Next point is that green line is what's technically possible. It's not permissible, it's not reasonable, we shouldn't be operating there, but this is what's possible. Everything above the green line is policy. That's what's permissible. So this next line, the yellow line that just came in, that's Plan 2014 with no F limit or no L limit. That's pretty good. Significantly higher than what the channel could handle. Well below what would have occurred naturally. Interestingly enough, in 2017, we would have still had significant flooding, and 2019, we would have certainly approached it. That's base plan 2014. And we can talk about what actually constitutes a deviation. I know how the IJC and the board defines it. Anything that isn't base curve L and F is a deviation. I understand their terminology, but the reality is you can define a deviation whatever you want it to be. So now, whoops, ooh, that was quite the jump. Sorry about that. So now we add the F limit. That's the red line that just occurred. So we had the yellow line here, now we add the F limit, the red line. And what's clear from this is that the F limit adds a significant amount of water onto the lake. We are holding water back in Lake Ontario to benefit Montreal. Remember, the concept of the F limit is justified because, quite frankly, when you're negotiating the plan and you're running off the green line at the bottom, you're running from this line right here, I would want an F limit as well if I were in Quebec. You have to have it because we have so much capacity for conveying water through the dam that an F limit makes sense. But this isn't about making sense, this is about being fair. Now, the blue line that just showed up is Plan 2014 with F and L limit. And the thing that's really worth pointing out here is that in both 2017 and 2019, the F limit is what caused the peak of the flooding, not the L limit. What the L limit does, and the end of 2019 shows this quite clearly, blue is actual, this is with F limit, and this is the natural flow. So yellow, the bottom one bottom one is Plan 2014 without limits. What it shows is that you can certainly reduce the level in Lake Ontario at the end of the year. The only way that makes sense is if you then also have a deviation strategy like we have in place right now, which is indeed a true deviation. And I looked at the numbers for today. We are actually getting some benefit from that lake drop yesterday. But that's important to point out. The primary peak of the flood is caused by the F limit, the duration by the L limit. So if you take a look at the blue line, how much longer this took, then the red line coming down. All right, so in other terms, don't look at the graphs, just look at the block on the right-hand side. In 2017, upstream received 30 centimeters less benefit than downstream over pre-project conditions. In 2019, upstream received 21 centimeters less benefit than downstream. So directly, we know we get less benefit. I have the word non-compliance up here. That's not a legal non-compliance for Plan 2014 non-compliance. It's the limits of what's achievable, because in both 2017 and 19, we exceeded H3, which is the F limit, and H4 and H14, which are limits on Lake Ontario. So I can chat to people about what these limits are at another time, but just take the left side is downstream and the right side of the plot is upstream. So downstream, 2017 in blue, 2019 in orange. It does not take an engineering degree to take a look at this and say that the duration of flooding above top numbers upstream, that's us on Lake Ontario, is multiple times higher than downstream. 3 to 5 times longer, rather. So now if we change that to how severe is the flooding? Once again, left side is downstream, right side is upstream. The severity of upstream flooding was 2 to 4 times higher than downstream. So let me just add all that up. Downstream gets more benefit from the dam over pre-project conditions in both 2017 and 19. The flooding duration upstream is 3 to 5 times longer than downstream, and the severity above the upper limits is 2 to 4 times higher than downstream. That does not sound fair. That does not sound balanced to me at all, and it's something that I think has to be changed, or at least discussed. How does that even come about? Okay, so here's a plot that's a little bit complicated. What I really want you to look at are these red areas right here. And here I'm plotting in blue the actual outflow out of Lake Ontario, and in orange, I'm plotting the outflow rate that we would achieve under pre-project conditions, meaning quasi-natural conditions. If the blue line is below the orange line, which it is in these red areas here, 19 and 17, we are intentionally holding water on Lake Ontario for the benefit of downstream. And we are doing that at an extent that is more severe than pre-project conditions for the sole benefit of the lower St. Lawrence River in Montreal. That's the mechanism that makes that happen. So in both 2017 and 2019, Moses Saunders outflows were reduced below pre-project to accommodate the effluent. I hope I've made the point that operation of Plan 2014 is unbalanced to the benefit of downstream and to the detriment of upstream. And I will continue to have conversations with the board and the IJC to see if that cannot be changed, or have somebody explain to me why it's actually fair. It sure doesn't look it. Okay, so how big an injury is this? And this is in inches, but I do have it in centimeters as well. So in 2017, that reduction below pre-project cost us 8 centimeters on the lake. In 2019, that reduction cost us 15 centimeters on the lake. The injury to upstream caused by the unlimited reduction of Moses Saunders Dam outflow is significant. 15 centimeters in 2019 matters. 6 inches. I just looked at the numbers again for flooding height, how much damage a house has. So a 2,500 square foot home, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration in the US, estimates that every inch of flood at your house causes $25,000 in damage. So obviously it has to hit the house first and then flood the house, but every inch that your house floods, $25,000 in damage. So yes, 6 inches is worth fighting for. So if we improve the L limit, we can get more space there, so we could potentially get 7.5 inches out of this by just utilizing some of the lessons that have already been learned and having a balanced effluent plan. Summarizing all that, the current application of the effluent allows Moses Saunders Dam outflow reductions below pre-project levels, yielding unbalanced benefit in favor of downstream. As a result, upstream levels are raised above pre-project equivalent. What we can do about this is modify the effluent, and one proposal is to no less than pre-project flow. Upstream no longer receives additional benefit from the dam at that point, and downstream receives no less protection than would have occurred pre-project. And I will freely admit that much more analysis is required to define what balanced actually means and to develop appropriate effluents that reflect a better balance than today. And the reason I say that is I've talked about the height difference in benefit, I've talked about the duration difference, and I've talked about the flooding severity difference. The problem is this, the way that the geometry of the system is, you can't equalize everything. So defining what's fair is very, very difficult and not my scope in this presentation. It's purely to say that what we have right now is not fair. All right, so closing out on this, how's 2020 shaping up? Where are we? So this is the 2020 forecast issued by the IJC and the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board. And here's the website for that. It's produced by Environment Canada and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's issued weekly, and the levels are slowly rising on it. And by levels, I mean the red 50% average line. So I don't think there's a guarantee of excessive flooding, but I think we should be prepared. I wish I were there in person because I could ask you the question, does this forecast help anybody? Because the range on it is so big, it says that we could be at the peak anywhere from 246.5 feet, which is where we are right now, all the way up to 249, depending on if we're wet or dry. You can't lose with that. We're going to be in this range somewhere, maybe a little bit above this at the top. But that does not help any of us plan. So what do? Here's the best I can come up with. And this is in some of the annexes related to Plan 2014. So this is not a Plan 2014 document, but the IJC has published many documents over the years that are actually somewhat helpful. And this is one that I found. It's very difficult to follow, but I'll try and walk you through it. So first you take a look at where last year was. Last year was above 75.5 meters, therefore we're very wet. Okay, so then you go to this table that's on the page prior to that, a couple paragraphs up, and you look at past year, very wet, got a 63% chance of next year being very wet as well, which doesn't really tell you what the level is going to be until you carefully read this, and it says that very wet means that the hydraulic conditions are similar, or supply conditions rather, were similar to the year 1993, which is what was used as defining wet. So 1993, and this is the best interpretation that I can come up with on this. The best interpretation is that we have a 63% chance of 2020 supply, which is NTS, to be similar to 1993, when Lake Ontario started similar to 2020 and peaked over 75.6 meters. That's the best I can come up with. I don't have a better forecast than that, and I don't believe the IJC does either. And I believe that closes my remarks, leaving you with the beauty shot of the dam last November.
So
Thank you for your time.
This is where everybody claps for Bernie, because he can hear you.
Not anymore.
Okay. So Bernie, if you can make me presenter again. So a couple things that I want to stress out of Bernie's presentation. And to me, it's one of the most important slides that I've seen is this one. Right? So again, what Bernie explained to you, when Bernie says pre-project levels, it means the dam's not there. There's no dam. right? It doesn't exist, and if we got this much rain and this much snow and this much inflow, what would have happened? We would have flooded a lot worse. That's that line. But we do have a dam. We have a dam, and I was at a meeting with Scott recently, and what's...
Unmuted.
Oh, my computer's talking to me. And he said, you know, I could have walked to Ottawa, but I drove here because we have cars now, right? And that's a good point. We have a dam. Yes, it's interesting to know. It's interesting to know what it looks like if we didn't have a dam. But we do have a dam. And this is what the dam could do. So, of course, it's illustrative. But if there was no shipping, there was no Montreal, there was nothing else that we had to worry about, this is what we could have accomplished. Everything between these two lines is policy. So even with all the rain, all the snow, all the Lake Erie, this is what we could have accomplished. Does everybody follow that? That's what's so important. So when Bernie was saying that they reduced the outflow to below pre-project levels, it means that they dipped it down below this line. We held back even more water than would have been done normally if there was no dam in order to protect Montreal. All right? So everything else, right, that's where Plan 2014 sits. Plan 2014 sits here. That's policy. That is policy, and that is what we are here to talk about today. So I have just a little bit more time to talk about emergency management. Does that work, Don? Are people okay to listen to me for about 5-10 more minutes? I want to talk about emergency preparedness. Now, we have done these events all up and down the shoreline. So we've been in Trenton, we've been in Gananoque, we were in Ajax last week. Coming up very shortly, we are going to be in Picton, we're going to Toronto, we're going to be in Kingston, in Niagara, and in Hamilton. So we're doing these all up and down the shoreline. And in each one, we have extended the invitation for municipalities to have their fire departments come and talk to us about what their plans are for emergency management and emergency preparation and emergency response. So not all communities are doing that, but you do have to ask the question of your municipalities, what's the plan? What's the plan if this thing goes south in 2020? What can we expect from you as a municipality? The danger when a municipality doesn't have their fire chief up here telling you what the plan is that it means Sarah Delicate has the stage. And that's dangerous because I come from a different angle. My perspective is, what should we be doing? And one of the challenges that I have, oh, Bernie left us. One of the challenges that we have, so this comes from the federal, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of the department that manages this. Federal, provincial, and territorial governments joined to produce the Emergency Management Framework of Canada. So this is the Emergency Management Framework of Canada. Most emergencies in Canada are local in nature and are managed by the municipalities or at the provincial and territorial level. So the general rule of thumb is any emergency, no matter how large, starts at the local level. But when you look at an emergency management framework, it includes things like a prevention and mitigation working group, a preparedness working group, a response working group, a recovery working group, horizontal and other working groups as required. But emergency management has 4 to 5 stages in it. And when we ask municipalities, what's the plan, we want to know what's the prevention plan, the preparedness plan, the response plan, and the recovery plan. And if you don't have one, what is it? And are you calling in the province? Have you said to the province, we don't have the money to respond. You better get the money to us real darn quick because 2020 spring is coming fast. But instead, what we have is that municipalities can vote not to help. So this was a December 11th newspaper article, Brighton won't help with sandbagging if there's flooding next spring. Yet, this very same Public Safety Department of Canada, they have this one broad category where they talk about emergency management, and the title is ethical. Ethical. There is no role more fundamental for federal, provincial, and territorial governments than preserving the safety and security of their citizens. Emergency management decisions made by FPT governments are guided by ethics and value that accept the primacy of human life and human dignity. When actions may save lives, preserve the environment, or protect property and the economy, the immense impacts of these decisions must be weighed carefully within the context of emergency management ethics and values, yet municipalities can vote not to help. They think that untrained, largely elderly residents should be able to prepare and prevent a landscape-level Great Lake flood. And we know the answer is that they absolutely cannot. So note that the IJC could have let more water out over 2019 to help protect the shoreline, but they did not because they were concerned about the safety of shipping and that therefore transferred the risk to the shoreline with no resources, most are being left to their own devices. In Ontario, the local level is the first level of response and emergency management. They can only call in the province after exhausting their resources and declaring a state of emergency. So let's have a look at what it actually takes to protect the safety of a community. And I know this intimately because this is what Clarington, Ontario did. This is my municipality. In 2017, we were a disaster. It was an epic failure in emergency flood response. None of us were prepared. None of us were ready for it. But by 2019, we had it figured out. We're quite masterful now. Now, what we know is if two people are left alone to fill 2,000 sandbags for their 50-foot property, it would take 83 labor hours or 16 days of 5 hours of absolute back-breaking work. Now imagine if these two people are 70 years old, like the man in this photo. However, if 20 people are filling 2,000 bags, it would take 8 hours. This assumes continuous work, meaning no significant work stoppages, waiting for supplies, or taking long breaks. So there's a calculator online on what does it actually take? How long does it actually take to fill a sandbag? So this is our fire chief, Chief Weir, and he is our hero. He saved our community without a doubt, hands down. My home and my family are there because of that man and the Works Department. To protect our community, the first thing that was done was they formed an emergency committee working group with residents. So we have an official working group in our community where so all the houses are represented, and we sit with the fire department and the works department pre-flood, during flood, and after, almost weekly, for months during and after. Chief Weir recruited and trained public volunteers, over 100, put out calls for volunteers. Community members volunteered, came in and got trained. How do you fill sandbags? How do you deploy? What kind of equipment do you require? Then all of these emergency volunteers are on Rapid Notify. So if there is an event, he hits a button and it goes to a text, phone, and email. We need people filling, we need people deploying. He then called in Non-Governmental Organization Alliance. So there's NGO organizations. We had ADRA, Knights of Columbus over, and other groups brought boots to the ground. Dozens and dozens of non-government organizations coming in to build these sandbags in advance and to deploy sandbags. He coordinated high schools, giving students community hours while filling hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sandbags. He partnered with Durham College's emergency program students. He purchased a $10,000 sandbagging machine. This sandbagging machine requires 6 trained personnel and a front-end loader to operate. Coordinated 9 sandbagging events with the residents and working committees, taking place over 6 to 8 weeks over 2 geographic locations. He oversaw all logistics, all supply management, including storage and relocation of bags with the operations department. How many of you could do this? Because this is what it takes. How many of your municipalities received additional funds so that your fire chief could do this? Nobody has. So if you are a small community with a volunteer fire department, how are you going to make this happen? So we have an issue. Toronto spent $100,000 a week protecting their residents with full emergency support, yet some municipalities will only supply sand and bag. It's up there in town. Go fill your own bags and deploy your own bags. The problem is we all pay the same taxes. We all pay the same taxes, but if you live 45 minutes east, you get nothing. How can this possibly be right? Now, that was just talking about filling the sandbags. Secondly, the sandbags need to be physically deployed, and this is not easy. Each property needs to be analyzed for its topography. Where you build, how you build, and where you build it matters. So if one wall is built incorrectly and it fails, it doesn't just compromise that home, it compromises the entire community, because the water has now breached that and it's now wrecking the neighbors or taking out the evacuation route. So every wall must connect to the next, and they have to be built very specifically, distance, poly, etc. In 2017, none of us knew how to do this. None of us. So the problem is, now this shows you, this is a video of a broken link property in 2017. So this homeowner is over the age of 80 and could not build their sandbag walls. So the walls were built here, right? It's doing a great job holding back the water, but you can see the water is rushing over the property here. It was because of this event that our municipality called a state of emergency. So the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry came and built this wall, but not before our evacuation route was fully compromised, because this one home did not get protected. Right? So it can't be left up to homeowners. You might do a great job on your home, but if your neighbor, and somebody in the last rally said, I have one neighbor who's 80-something, my neighbor next to me has Alzheimer's, there's absolutely no way that they can protect their properties. So what happens when you don't? So it takes experts. So what happened in these videos here, I don't think they're going to play, we built them wrong. We built them too close. So in 2017, they were built too close and they were built wrong. And that's what you're seeing in this video, is the wall was built too close, the lake laughed at us and just pushed them over. And in the early part of 2017, for all of our houses, we only had 2,000 sandbags, so we had to redeploy these. We had to take them. And now what you've done is taken emergency responders in full bunker gear with no life jackets and no harnesses in these massive waves trying to redeploy sandbags because it wasn't done correctly the first time. So municipalities that are saying to homeowners, do it yourself, this is the risk that you're putting everybody in. Because if the walls are not built correctly and they fail and the water breaches, and the breach is now taking out an evacuation route, we now have massive issues. Is everybody following me? So somewhere along the line, it takes troops of able-bodied people. So this is what happened in our community. This was coordinated by our fire chief. Look at how many people it took to build these walls. And without them, homes would have been lost. And I love it when people say, well, you shouldn't live there. That's a new build. That permit was issued in 2017. Each bag will weigh between 30 and 60 pounds. Lots of heavy equipment is required to move each bag from the property to the shore. About a 50-foot lot is 2,000 sandbags. That's somewhere between 60,000 to 120,000 pounds of sand being deployed on one property. Right? How can any homeowner do that? And what if they are seniors or they are persons with disability? So ultimately, we have to really look at how we are, like we know, it's not that we don't know this is coming, we know it is coming. Homeowners are fully engaged, the pumps are managed 24/7, alarms are set all through the night, you cannot sleep. You have to stay in your home for weeks on end to manage these pumps. Residents spend thousands of dollars on hoses and pumps alone. They will lose days and weeks of work, face contaminated water wells and breached septics. They are mentally exhausted, financially depleted, and they're facing protracted trauma. So in 2017, I went and met with the then Canadian chair, Chair Gordon of the IJC, and I said, I don't even want to talk about Plan 2014. I just want to talk about the fact that these waters have been brought to Lake Ontario and there are no emergency management plans for the hazard of flooding. Flooding is now the #1 risk in Canada and Ontario, not fire, flood. But most municipalities still do not have emergency management plans for the hazard of flooding. They have generic emergency plans. So I pleaded, please, 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 can the IJC please encourage Ontario and New York to make emergency management plans for the hazard of flooding mandatory? And he agreed, but it didn't happen, and then he left and we got a new IJC chair. We flooded again in 2019, and 2020 is on its way. So what I am doing here in the corner, Premier Ford, we urgently need you to standardize and fund effective emergency management flooding at the local level. Floods 2020 are near. And as it stands right now, it's a matter of a council vote. And this hurts my little blue soul terribly. So it's one of the other asks that we have. Start writing your letters, because we are, what, 6 weeks away? With that, you have to clap for me because I'm done now.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for everybody has clapping for Sarah. So the next person I have on the agenda was a comment from our local Canadian Tire store owner who did have a letter to the editor earlier this fall and spoke about the effects of the local economy. So I thought I'd ask him to come up now if I could. Alex, please. So please welcome Alex Jonas from the local Canadian Tire store.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I don't have any fancy presentations. I just sell tires for a living. So essentially, owning a business in Brockville gives us insight to consumer buying patterns. And I watch it very, very closely. And last year, we started to see some dangerous trends happening. For example, it's a no-brainer. Our marine business was down 40%, which is concerning, but there was other categories in our business that took a hit, like fishing, camping, summer clothing, barbecue, patio. The list goes on, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost revenues for our store. There's no surprise to know that most businesses in this town rely at least 40 to 75% of their business coming through during that May to August part of the year when cottages are here. And we feel it when they're not here. And if this goes unchecked and unchallenged, we are going to see some employment losses for sure, and lost revenues as well. We all rely on tourism. There's no question. This is not just a riverfront issue. If I were a marina, absolutely, we get it. I'd be impacted. I'm nowhere near the river, yet I'm impacted. It impacts everybody, whether you own a gas bar, a restaurant, a retail store, right to a car dealership, veterinarian's office. If the cottagers don't come, they don't bring Fido, he doesn't get food at the vet, he doesn't get shots. We're all being affected by this. So my involvement in this really, and why we started a petition, is so that we can hopefully gather some more commercial strength and get out there and get the message out to everyone. And on a personal level, I've seen neighbors, and we hear the stories of the folks that signed the petition, explaining the issues they're dealing with, and just like was presented today, it's being felt in this community. I hope this initiative gathers a lot of momentum, and hopefully we can protect our economy going forward. We're not a thriving economy, so to have this part of our industry or our economy affected is going to be a huge impact, not this year, maybe not next, but certainly down the road. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's a great perspective to have. And, the effects run deep. The river rats are suffering, if you will. It's a whole way of life. A river culture is being threatened. So next, I'd like to go back to what I didn't do earlier because I didn't have this clipboard, and that was recognize our local elected officials. Mayor Baker recognized some, but I'd like to do that now, and I have a few written comments we'll share as well. And what I'm not quite clear of, I think a few of the folks said they would like to say a few words, so you'll have to tell me if you do or not, because I don't have that here. But we have from Augusta Township, Doug Milenka. And I don't know, Doug, you want to say anything to us here on this? Or you don't have to, but it's an opportunity. You want to come up? You can come up if you want. This part isn't that organized, so.
Well, in terms of what I was going to say here, I had no idea what to prepare or be ready for. One of the things that struck me as I'm sitting here listening to all of that's been presented, it's almost impossible for me to try and comment on every aspect of it. I guess I'll just put everybody into the setting that in our municipality, we don't have infrastructure on the water in terms of a water treatment plant or anything. And so the damage was done to residents. In terms of what we did in 2017 when we saw that the water was rising and not going down, was to immediately call our emergency team and essentially assess the situation. So the first thing we did is looked at our supply of sand and bags and made certain that we ordered more. We also made an arrangement with neighboring communities of Prescott and Edwardsburg Cardinal and others to ensure that if any of us were running out of supplies, that we agreed that we would help each other. In our township, we decided that we would ask our fire department to go along County Road 2, which is along the St. Lawrence River, and essentially look at all the properties that appeared that they were at risk of flooding if the water continued to rise. We found that we had approximately 15 to 18 houses at risk. The fire department went in, assigned a number to it, looked at the people who were there to see if we were talking about somebody that was elderly or people that were younger and able to, a little more able to help themselves. And then we made a point of saying that they were there to help if it was needed. We did supply sand and bags. We had bags filled, but I can't give you the number, and I know we had a student in filling the bags and some staff, so I can't give you that number, but at least we had that in place. One of the organizers of this presentation, Richard, was one of the most severe hit in our township, and that water was right into the house. And when I went down one night to look at it, our fire department was there helping to bail the water, and we had to call up the Seaway Authority because after about 20 minutes of bailing, a ship would go by at regular speed and put the water back that had been taken out. So we quickly made certain that we were following with the Seaway to keep the shipping low. And then our emergency officer continued to monitor the situation. We essentially repeated that in 2019. So as you can see, I didn't have the complexity of some of the things of the other mayors that are affected. But given that I'm a mayor of Leeds and Grenville, I certainly joined with my other mayors who had a lot more difficulties. And our first order of business was to try and get answers. So we asked and participated in meetings with the IJC and the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence Board of Control, encouraged them to get involved more with the public. And that was more writing rather than public meetings. I don't know how helpful it was, but I didn't really hear anybody being terribly satisfied by what they were hearing. The next thing we tried to do is get some compensation for people. I think Mayor Baker has already mentioned that there's a $20 million fund, or at least it starts at that. And so the thoughts of the mayors was that we would consider pooling our money together and do a study that would be required to prepare an application to go to the federal government. And then if it was successful, we would then look to the province to assist us because municipalities would not be able to take on or to pay out the expenses that would be involved in compensating both residents and businesses. So we stand to do that. I believe Mayor Corina Smith-Gacky of Leeds and Thousand Island is taking the lead on that. So as I say, that's one of the actions. In the various explanations that have been given, I have to say that's my understanding of the situation, and it goes back to why is Montreal protected? And my understanding, subject to being corrected, is that way back in the days of the Seaway, and when there was a decision to establish the IJC, it was in the agreement that Quebec would not receive more water than out of the arrangement than what it was used to. Now, I know that's a very generalized discussion of what you're saying, but essentially the rule was Montreal has to be protected. Now, one of the things that I have heard, and this is through our emergency measure person who was involved with Environment Canada, is that there are some potentially things that Montreal could do that would reduce the impact of the Ottawa River on it. And I think that's something that should be looked at by an independent body that not only looks at the arrangement that's with us, but also looks at what could be done in order to try and relieve what's going on at the Ottawa River. Just as an example, I understand that the Ottawa River, as it approaches Montreal, breaks into 3 streams. 2 of them go towards Montreal before it gets to the city, and 1 after. The question I have in my mind is very simple, and maybe it's too simple that engineers will tell me it's impossible, but for me, it's like Duff's, what is it? I'm forgetting the name of in Manitoba, where they have the water bypass the city. And the question I ask is, why do they not block off the 2 streams that are going towards Montreal ahead of the city and have the water bypass and go behind Montreal? I don't know, but there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, and I think there is a requirement for an independent study. In terms of equity, I absolutely agree. I understand shipping being extremely important to our economy, and so in effect, we're paying in order for that industry to continue. And likewise with the protection of Montreal, also important. When you compare the damage that would occur if a large urban center as Montreal was flooded, compared to our properties, even though it's painful, as a homeowner, which I am, I'm on the St. Lawrence River. But I do seriously believe that there should be compensation to those who are injured, because whenever there is a winner and loser, and with most government things, they actually in their adverse consequences identify the winners and losers, as they have in this legislation. There's usually some kind of a plan to make certain that there is compensation or something to try and help the losers, if you can use that terminology. Actually, you don't like to when it's causing the injury and the stress to everybody. But I mean, in plain terms, in the legislative world, that's what they talk, because they're usually reducing everything to numbers. So just to say that in terms of our township, we are going to hold another meeting to make certain that we're ready for 2020, whatever it will be, and continue to provide the help. I think that's about all I can say at this point in time, and so I'm certainly appreciate the difficulty everyone's having.
Thank you, Doug. Those are great comments and an update. I appreciate that very much. And I was sort of standing behind you. I hope you didn't mind that, but I should have stood beside you, I suppose. So the next person I have on my list here to recognize was our Elizabethtown Kittley Mayor, Brant Burrow. Welcome, Brant.
Thanks, Don, and thanks to my colleague Doug for going ahead of me. He saved me a lot of time and effort. I guess I'm going to count myself one of the fortunate ones. I'm mayor of a municipality that only has a few property owners that are affected in a dramatic way. That's not to discount the value of docks and those types of things, but in terms of the type of mental stress that Sarah's been talking about, I'm very fortunate. There are only a few, probably under 10. Now, having said that, I'm aware of one resident who's had to go to the extreme or felt they needed to go to the extreme of literally moving their house up and back. So that's one of the more dramatic responses that it has taken in my case. I've met with a number of my river colleagues on a number of occasions, some formal, some informal, and a lot of the preparations that we've been going through as a township are very similar to what Mayor Milenka has described. More recently at a conference, a number of us talked about these automated sandbagging machines and what may be required. Do we each require one? Do we have to expend that type of resource? Or is it the type of thing where we can get a more sophisticated machine that we can rotate around amongst us to prepare these things if and as they're needed? Again, given that we're not dealing with hundreds and hundreds of properties, I'm dealing with 10. Mayor Milenka is dealing with 15. So we're trying to make sure that the type of response that we put in place is appropriate. And I think that we all have a role to play. The grassroots group, United Shorelines, is playing the role that they have to play extremely well. I've been in a position like Sarah where I've been trying to educate people as part of a grassroots group. And they've done the same types of things that I did. They've really gone to school to make sure the information that they're presenting is the best that it can possibly be. Having said that, when you try and force a yes-no question, it's a convenient technique, but it doesn't always get you the answer that you need. It might get you the answer you want to hear. So if somebody says, did you drive through that stoplight? And you say, well, I could have stopped if there wasn't the black light. No, just yes or no. Did you drive through or didn't you? Well, yeah, I did. Right? But the details, the nuances give the whole story. So it's important to take the context in. That's not a criticism, but I understand the techniques. The reason I'm pointing that out is because as elected officials, we have a different role to play. And so it does us no good if we get to the point where we're that irritating politician that nobody wants to hear from anymore. So we have a role that might not look as dramatic. It's not as showy, but it doesn't mean that we're not doing the things we have to do effectively. And I hope that when you elected us and you put your trust in us to do those things, that trust will continue, that we really are trying to do our best to respond appropriately. My response is not going to be the same as Mayor Milenka's, as Mayor Baker's, or anybody else along the shoreline, but I hope we're doing the things that we need to and should do for our municipality. The other thing is, I took what the gentleman from Canadian Tire said to heart. He talked about the impact to business if this continues, and how we need tourism, and there's this ripple effect and so on. As much as I do not want this to be interpreted that I think we should be paying the price so that shipping is protected. That's not the point at all. But we can't ignore the message that we're going to send to the international community if the international shipping industry can't rely on the seaway. What kind of ripple effect is that going to have? We heard what is going to happen to one single store if the tourism industry is affected. Well, when you consider the tonnage of our goods that comes up and down the seaway, those are things that as elected officials, we can't just ignore. We have to take that into consideration as we decide, what we ask for, what we pressure people to do, what we get involved with, what our own responses are. So, as I say, we all have a role to play. I hope we're all playing it effectively. And I would welcome any legitimate criticism that anybody has of the response that we have in Elizabethtown Kittley, because if we can do it better, we will. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Burrow. Thank you, Mayor Burrow. Next on my list is Mayor Dennis Doyle from Frontenac Islands.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Sarah, for the excellent presentation. I'm from Frontenac Islands, and we're completely serviced by ferries, and we declared an emergency in 2017 because we're having trouble getting to some of our islands with the ferries. And by declaring emergency, we did get to implement our emergency plan, which we've been practicing for years. And it was actually pretty good and helped us a lot. But once we declared, we got the fire departments and a lot of help from public health, the paramedic service, and a lot of other agencies that stepped in to help us out. And while we weren't 100% prepared with sandbagging, we quickly learned how to do that and protected our residents. And I should have mentioned that given we're completely all islands in our municipality, we have 253 kilometers of shoreline, which have a lot of docks every few hundred meters all the way around some of the major islands, Wolf being the biggest with 155 kilometers of shoreline. And we just nicely got those docks rebuilt in 2018 when 2019 come along and destroyed them again. So there is a lot of stress in our community as well, Sarah, on shoreline damage. But going forward, I agree we all have to work together and be better prepared and work with our local provincial politicians and the federal politicians. And over the past 2 years, we've met with them all, passed several resolutions at council to ask IGC to do various things. Late last summer, we sent one, asked them to keep the maximum water flow, and they nicely got back to us and agreed that they'd do it with lots of conditions, but we won't get into that tonight. I know a lot of other people probably want to speak, so I'll pass the mic back to Don, and thanks again.
Thank you, Mayor Doyle. So the next person I have on my list is Brian McGillis. Is he here? I'm not quite sure. Yes, sir, he is here. Did you want to speak? Or I can just recognize you. So this is, Brian McGillis from South Stormont.
Thanks, Don, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I didn't think I was going to make it, but I made it. I was away. So I'm not as dressed as nice as all the other mayors here, sitting here. My story is a little different. I mean, as Don said, I'm from South Stormont, my municipality is South Stormont, and we're affected in a kind of a different way. We all sympathize upstream, what you all went through 2018 or 2017, 2019. We have the lack of water, and the lack of water is creating a negative impact economically for us too as well. When you're talking about your small businesses, they rely at peak times during the season. Where our economic development grows, we were, back in the day during the Seaway, Hydro displaced 11 different hamlets and villages called the Lost Villages that created two different areas in our township, which was Long Sault and Ingleside. Now, those people lost their waterfront, and now they can't even load their boats in the fall, back on the launches. So it's a situation where everybody's impacted, and I feel that, people have mixed messages of what's going on with the IJC, what's happening, how they're making the difference, but we both are being sacrificed, upstream and where I am. It's like somebody took the plug out of the tub where we are. And it's heartbreaking. So I just want to know that if anybody in all the municipalities that are affected, that they can rely on us to help. We have a role to play, I agree, but we're here too. But things have to change because this is historic, and we have to make sure that the people that are paying taxes, the people that are paying higher taxes because they live on the waterfront, their values of their property are impacted. Taxes are going to be impacted, so that's going to affect the rest of the residents in their communities and businesses and industry as well in terms of the cost of taxes. So it's kind of a vicious circle. So I just came here to listen to what everybody had to say. I'm glad I came here, and we're willing to help if we can in any way. And I know the other municipalities within SDNG along the water can do the same thing. So I'm a little emotional. I feel that the people that didn't get the help last 2 years, where this really created a problem for their homes, that the help will be there this year for them. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here this evening. Glad that Larry and Sherry Pringle, who are residents of ours in Greater Napanee, who actually live on the water there, but they're high enough, and they haven't been able to use their property down here. We've spent a lot of time in this area because one of our favorite marinas, and I'm trying not to give anybody a plug, but we've done a lot of business with Huck Marina over the years, so I don't want to see them damaged any further. We in Greater Napanee had our own get-together like this that we had Sarah do a little shorter performance. And what we concentrated on was getting information and pictures that we could take forward later on. It's great to send letters, and I encourage you to send them every day, as I do. I know that some of the mayors say that we have to deal with this differently. Well, I guess maybe I am a little different because I try to contact them all the time. It's important to make sure that they're just seeing the pictures. I don't think I realized how much damage was done in Greater Napanee, not nearly to the extent that what Sarah has had to deal with, and not nearly to the extent that many of you have had to deal with down here. But when people brought in pictures of properties that they had had for years and years and they'd never come anywhere near the damage that they had in 2017, and God, it occurred again in 2019, and they're looking at it for 2020. Many of them would just like to walk away. I got a letter from people that have just bought property in 2018 down on the south shore of Hay Bay, which very, very low-lying lands, and they were very upset that the municipality had not told them about Plan 2014. Well, I'm going to just ask the mayors that are sitting here. 2014, how many of you knew the plan was there before all this started? One, good. But, I mean, you know, it just wasn't evident to us as to the damages. I guess the plan, maybe we were a little aware of, but not so much as to what it could do. We need to work forward. The municipalities have to be a huge part. I'm interested to hear that the Eastern Ontario mayors are getting together to try and combine to get up to their 20 million. Of course, I'm the warden of the County of Lennox and Addington, and I know that the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus would be more than happy to be a part of that too. I don't think it would be too long that we could get up to 20 million. We have to stay on this. We can't see it get worse. Our businesses are being hurt. Our municipal infrastructure, as many of us have said, is stable, except that we have all kinds of green spaces and so on that we can't use. We always want to give people the access to waterfront, and now it's tough for us to do it because they can't get to it. And of course, that gives us a terrible hit in our budgets, which are tight anyway. The province and the federal government has to come forward, but most of all, the IJC has to start answering our letters, has to start looking at, I'm not asking for a repeal, I'm asking for an adjustment, and it needs to be now. And thank you, and please keep pushing for the support.
Thank you, Mayor Espester. I got that right, I think. So, Greater Napanee. I think in terms of municipal councillors or municipal elected officials, I want to recognize Matt Wren, local councillor. He's in the audience. Is there any other municipal politicians here that I haven't noted? Okay, so next, just move on to our, we have actually no, I got to do one more thing here. I do have a letter here or note from Roger Haley from Front of Young Township, who is west of us, and he says here, I remain very concerned with the consistent high water and agree that the IJC should have more representation from the St. Lawrence corridor. I am telling our residents in Front of Young to prepare for the worst in 2020. And then, you know, Richard, one of our committee members, has talked to a number of the folks, and there were some generalities here that I'll just speak to here. Many mayors could not attend. I guess if we'd known that Mondays was a significant meeting day, we might have tried a different time, but apologize for that. So the mayors expressed that they are concerned and interested in resolutions on the water issues. They are trying their best to play an appropriate role in dealing with the issue. They are advising residents along the shoreline to prepare now for high water this year. So that, I think, kind of closes the comments from the municipal elected officials. So we also have the representative from our MPP, Michael Gigas, so I'll just recognize him. And we also have a letter from Steve Clark, our MPP. Well, we also have our MP Executive Assistant, Randy Hopkins, and so I'd like to recognize Randy here as well. And okay, so now we have this up here. So I will just read it too, in case it's not as visible as for some. As MP for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, the Rideau Lakes, I commend the organizers of the High Water Talks information session. I regret my schedule did not allow me to attend in person. However, my executive assistant, Michael Gigas, is here, and we've recognized him. Flooding in 2017, and again last spring, has been nothing short of devastating to residents and business along the St. Lawrence River in our riding. I repeat, this spring would be disastrous, and I want to know that I have been actively working on your behalf with local MP Michael Barrett, area mayors, and our provincial government. The focus of my effort has been ensuring our voices are not only heard by International Joint Commission, but that our region has a seat at the table, both in the IJC and the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence Board. As I wrote in my letter to the IGC earlier this month, the voice of the representative from these Ontario communities, someone who can speak directly to the devastation that they have experienced, is what the LOSR board and IGC needs to hear at this time, particularly as the board's decision in the incoming months regarding water level management will be critical to avoiding the potential or even worse flooding in the region this spring. I am pleased that Premier Ford is also standing with us by calling on Prime Minister Trudeau to use his power and appoint an Ontario representative to the IJC. In addition to demanding urgent action from the IJC to lower water levels ahead of the spring, I understand that our municipalities require support to better protect residents, businesses, and their own infrastructure from flooding. No government can do this alone, and I know you expect all three levels of government to work together. That's why our Ontario Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, I wrote last week to the Honourable Bill Blair, Canada's Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. I request that Minister Blair and the federal government extend the natural disaster mitigation program for another 5 years. I also ask that the program be made more flexible to allow municipalities, smaller municipalities like those in our region to qualify. Thank you for everyone coming tonight, and my sincere appreciation to all presenters for your ongoing efforts and to ensure the public and elected officials alike are engaged and informed. MP Steve Clark. We'll move on to questions, and there may be a few answers, but we'll start with questions. I'd like whoever has a question to come up to our mics. We'll have them turned on, and I'd ask you to state your name and your location, and you'll maybe take no more than a minute to succinctly state your question, and hopefully we can hear everybody's questions. So have we got a questioner coming up to the mic?
Testing.
Okay.
Hi. I'd like to, first of all, thank you all for coming out. I'm Nelson Gilbert. I'm fourth generation at Gilbert Marine. My son, who's trying to stay awake over there, fifth generation, and my dad up here, third generation, who's in his 90th year. The one thing that really scares me is, I'm almost hesitant to say it here, is I don't want to hear somebody tell me that the Thousand Islands are closed for business. However, that was pretty much the case in 2017, 2019. So we need to figure out how to make sure that we can minimize that impact. We're faced with settling home and losing it. We had to walk through the river to get in our house in 17 and 19. And we're obviously faced with critical loss of our business. In addition to those concerns, I see a lot of people here that I know would need help with sandbagging. Those are sad tidings. And sandbagging may not be the answer. I think the big answer is, what can we do to help each other with the skill sets that we have. And I think there are a lot of very literate people here that have excellent writing skills and need to be able to reach out to our representatives and tell two friends, like the shampoo commercial, because that's how we're going to get our word out. And we seriously need that voice. So I think that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nelson. Was there a question in there? Okay, sir, please stand up.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Richard Bradley. My mother is 96 years old, or 95, I'm the caregiver for the Fernbank Cottage. We're looking at having to get our boathouse and boathouse cottage raised, elevated 3 feet. And you're quite correct. The Conservation Authority doesn't want us to do this because we might endanger a goby breeding ground. But on the other hand, if we don't do it, we're going to be selling the cottage, and the tax base of $5,000 a year will not be going into somebody's coffers. Anyway, I'm ex-military, and I know how to goddamn fill a sandbag, but I sure as hell don't know how to properly make a burn to protect my neighbors or my property. And where do we get information on this? And obviously I have too many parachute jumps that didn't work too well. That's why I'm using a cane. Or maybe I'm lacking a few things up here because I did jump out of a perfectly good aircraft. But as a riparian, and I did know what that word was because I watched one of the British BBC comedies, where do we get the information on how to build a proper sandbag wall? In 2017, there was no polyurethane and the bags, you're right, they fell over. 2019, we didn't make the bags high enough, or we're trying to protect the gardens at the expense of doing something else. There has to be a clearinghouse somewhere for people like myself on how to build these bloody things in the first place and where to get the material. And maybe the municipalities can pre-position pallets of filled sandbags. It takes about 10 minutes, on a windy day for somebody to hold the bag out and somebody to put their cane up here and somebody to try to fill the GD thing. Pre-positioning pallets of filled sandbags would go an awful long way, especially if there are only 10 properties in one municipality that are affected or 15 in another. But the information on how to build the bloody things would help.
Sure.
Thank you.
So one of the things that United Shoreline Ontario is also striving to do is become a clearinghouse of that information. So if you go to our website and go to Prepare for High Water under Flood Preparations, we have compiled many, many resources on how to build sandbag walls and prepare your house. We've stolen from some of the municipalities their best practices, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have partnered with the Intact Center for Climate Adaptation from the University of Waterloo that has compiled a temporary flood barrier resource list, so things other than sandbag walls that are available. There's a list of best practice emergency management plans for flooding that have been gathered from municipalities. So we do have a lot of information on here that if you have the capacity and the resources and you can do it, how to do it well, the information is there. The challenge is that when we asked the shoreline, how many of you feel that you have the capacity and the resources to actually do the best practices, the vast majority of our shoreline does not have the ability. And this is where, again, we have to ask the question, if Premier Ford knows this is happening, why can't we start moving those pallets of sandbags where they need to go? Right? Have other organizations build them, get them down, get them built. We know it's coming. We've had 3 years now to be ready for this. But it's a very good question. If you find yourself in that situation, you have to do the research. We have piles and piles on our website.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the question of where you can get help. As I said, I identified myself as being on the river, and the water came very close to topping my property. It did not. But in anticipation of what's to come, I decided that I wanted to try and raise the elevation. Let me take a step back. In terms of the activities of mayors, one of the things that we thought of with regard to the conservation authorities is that in addition to asking IJC and the other board for getting out to the public and assist, we asked the conservation authorities also to hold public meetings to more or less make sure everybody's clear what the application and permit system is and how it works. and what resources are there to help people do whatever they want to do or need to do. And the third thing we asked is that they would consider waiving fees because given a time of disaster, the thought was that they should be waived. So back to my situation where I'm dealing now with the South Nation as a client, essentially I've learned a couple things that I want to pass along to you. The first is that when you go to the website and take a dump of the various forms and applications that you see, you may be very confused, and you may also kind of close your eyes and go, no, I'm not sure I want to get involved in this. For example, in one of their forms on fee structures, they talk about a consultation worth about $1,200. And so I had actually had one of the residents in my township say to me, if I go to do any work, I've got to start paying $1,200 just to even have a conversation before I've done anything. What I've learned is that the authorities are really trying to bend over backwards in terms of helping. They're not out there with the public meetings, and I'm disappointed, and I pass that along to them. I think they should be, to explain all things that they can be involved in. But I will say this, they understand that the material that they have on the site is not as clear as it can be, and I think it represents the fact that before the days of flooding, you were usually involved in large projects, and so maybe these fee structures worked. The message I got was for small jobs like that I'm doing, that they don't need to go into the level of detail and design sketches that are suggested in their website. So what they stressed to me is that if you think that you want a project, and I'm speaking for South Nation Conservation, I better make that clear, because I know it's the conservation authorities vary a bit in their approach. But in South Nation, which is in our area, they're saying call and have someone come and give a pre-consultation. That will be without fee, and they'll give an idea of what challenge you have and what possible solutions you can have. They'll also give you a quick review of the application form, and where it would seem that they're demanding very onerous sketches and diagrams and that would normally be done by a professional. They'll clarify you what they need, and it can be, and in most cases it can be whatever you're able to do. We also talked about the waiving of fees, and essentially the comeback was, well, the fees are what we operate on, so if we're waiving fees, what can we do? And I think that's where the province of Ontario should also be coming in, the government, in that I think if there is an agreement that the fees should be waived, I think the government should be looking at the possibility of picking up those fees, because again, you have an organization, for many of us, doing a very valuable job, and we're essentially asking them to slash their budget. When I was at the Rural Ontario Municipality Conference, I also went and visited to see what I could see in terms of exhibitors that were there of interest. I stopped by the MPAC office and asked them what happens for people whose property has lowered in value because of what's happened to them. And they mentioned Form 357, which is a form that deals with that exact same thing. When something happens to an owner, whether it's tornado or whatever, that significantly changes the value of their home, there is this process that you can apply for. And once you fill in 357 and give it to them, it goes to the municipality, who I understand, and this was a brief conversation, so I may be off on a little of the details, but essentially it's within 90 days you will have an answer as to whether or not the value will be recognized as lower. And I understand that you have to reapply for every year. The other thing that I looked at, and I know it's prohibitive from one point of view, and that is instead of sandbags, use these water tubes that are sold. There was a manufacturer there that the name of the company is Tiger Dams. A 50-foot tube that's roughly 3 feet high is $2,600, and they can have it to you within 3 or 4 days. It can be installed by anybody in the sense that all you need is a water pump and a source of water, which if you're on the river, there it is. It gets rid of that back-breaking work and I hear the call for volunteers, but as everybody keeps saying, look at the back-breaking job that is for elderly. It's also a back-breaking job for many people because we're not all out there fit as we need to be. So putting up a 50-foot wall of sandbags, which I understand it was suggested to me is 2,000 bags. If you at all can afford it, I would look, and I have material if you want to pick some up for me here. I have a couple of folders. The other thing we're looking at, I've asked my CAO to look at, and that is, could we use these tubes for other things? They might be useful for, at a fire, for containing material that should be contained, essentially. And we have also other waterways in our township that they may be useful. So there is a possibility that council can look at buying a number of these sandbags, these water tubes. And because the number of residents in our municipality are not necessarily high, we'll look at that and see as part of our efforts to try and help our homeowners and our residents, especially those who are elderly, to deal with it. So I just wanted to pass that along, that especially with regard to the conservation authorities, because they are getting some criticism, and in some conservation authorities, because they're not all the same. I think I'm hearing it's deserved, but the big word from the South Nation is call them, talk to them, and they'll try and assist you.
Thank you, Mayor Milenka. I can also relate an experience. I recently applied for dumping truckloads of rock for my shoreline with the Cataraqui Conservation Authority, and that went fairly smoothly and fairly quickly. It was a matter of annotating some pictures and filling out a form and answering questions, but it did go fairly well. It was $400. So please step up. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wendy Merkley. I'm from Rockport. I am a business owner who's been through both of these floods and the sandbagging. I want to thank you. This is the second time, Sarah, I've heard you, and I learn all the time. I'll talk to a lot of people who weren't coming tonight because they said it's no use and nothing's going to happen with the IJC. I tried to change that, but I wasn't successful. My question, though, is about Lake St. Lawrence and the Iroquois Lock. Why is it that the water is so much lower there and they aren't having the issue, but everybody west of the Iroquois Lock, between the Iroquois Lock and the Cornwall Dam, aren't having high water issues? In fact, he said tonight they're having low water issues, and they had to actually slow down the output, as I understand it, to raise the water so they could get the boats out at Chrysler Marina. Why is that happening?
I probably can answer that. Because the dam has greater capacity to flow water than upstream, so when you open up the dam, that means the water level in front of the dam will lower, but the level upstream will still remain relatively the same. So it's kind of, I know I first questioned it as well, is you'd think if you increased flow, the water level would be higher, but that's opposite for that area of the river just because of the hydrology of the river.
Is it the Iroquois holding it?
I don't know if I can define it that way. I don't know it well enough, but when I questioned it, that was the answer, is that, I suspect it applies from the Iroquois Dam to the Messina Dam, but
Because once you get west of the Iroquois one, it seems to be back.
the Iroquois doesn't always hold back water either, so.
It wasn't supposed to,
Yeah,
I didn't think.
but, there's natural bottlenecks in the river that does hold back water too, so there's probably a gradual decline in level as you get closer to the Messina Dam when it's fully open.
So I can't even begin to answer that, but I know there's a fellow that was out with those boards, so there's a bunch of pictures out there. It's Ian, right?
Ian Campbell?
Ian Campbell, are you here? Is Ian still here? He's over there, right? So I know he has the board set up out there, and when we wrap up, I'll go chat with that fella. He'll show you all of the dams, and he's got a thorough understanding of how all of that works, but it's a very relevant question, without a doubt. There's that microphone right there is active too, if you wanted to stand up and speak. A statement rather than a question. I'm going to repeat because we're also being videotaped, so we want to hear it as well. Richard's going to bring you the microphone. That's service.
Thank you. I'm an old Brockville boy, living in Kingston for many years, and I've made a living off this river in one way or another. Marine surveys, tour boat operations, shipbuilding. So I'm a bit of a river rat. When all this started in 2017, I started to get interested in it, and I'm certainly interested in it now. So I spent a few little excursions downriver this summer, because I do marine survey work. I've been up and down the river quite a bit, and I make a point of stopping into some of these points of interest. The Iroquois Dam was closed, not the Moses Saunders Dam. The Iroquois Dam was closed on April the 16th, and it didn't open until mid-June. Why did it do that? Because the Ottawa River was out of control and flooding Montreal. I was in Montreal last week. I went around to the yacht clubs, the Beauharnois Dam, talked to people, anybody who had an interest in what was going on the waterfront. Their water level went up by about 2 feet in Montreal, but it wasn't destructive like it was around here. The Ottawa River has been out of control many, many times, and the people that live in that part of the country are getting kind of used to it because they expect to have 6 to 12 foot floods. In the area of Constance Bay, north of Ottawa, they did have 12-foot floods in there. You may have seen pictures of the Army putting in sandbag banks around Constance Bay. The problem with Constance Bay is the whole community is on sand. Doesn't matter how high you build the sandbags, the water goes right underneath the ground and pops up behind you. And they had situations where septic tanks were popping out of the ground behind them when they're building dikes along the shoreline. That's how serious it was up there. Until the IGC gets discussing the bigger picture with the people that look after the Ottawa River, and that's mostly Ontario Power Generation and Hydro-Quebec, until they get some communication going between those two groups, this is going to persist. There's got to be some sort of a overlap between the IGC and the Ottawa River. There is a board of control of sorts up there, but there's more than 100 dams that feed into the Ottawa River system. Many of those dams are privately owned, and some of them are 100, 150 years old because they were built to create sluiceways for the logging business, which they don't use anymore. But they're still there, and they still control part of the watershed that comes into the Ottawa River. And that goes from Bancroft in that direction to Val-d'Or in that direction to almost Kirkland Lake North. It's a huge watershed. And it's been out of control for many, many years, and as I say, the people have gotten kind of accustomed to it in a way. But there is no really connection between the IGC and the Ottawa River group. I've seen no correspondence that suggests they're even talking to each other because they're different jurisdictions. There's the root of the problem. If the Ottawa River had not been flooding as it was, you would not have had a problem here because there wouldn't have been any need to close the Iroquois Dam for 2 months. It's not, the boogeyman is not the Moses Saunders Dam. Moses Saunders Dam generates power. They have to have a consistent level of water to create the head pressure to create those turbines to make them work. Very similarly down at the Beauharnois Dam. I was there this week, as a matter of fact. It's a little less head of water there. It's about 90 feet at Moses Saunders. It's about 70 feet at Beauharnois. So they have a little different perspective on how they generate power, but they have to have a consistent level of water to make those turbines work correctly. And they have to go at a certain revolution per minute to create 60 cycles to make these lights work. I'm going back to Beauharnois sometime soon, but I did talk to one of the people that look after the, they have a visitors bureau there, and they have guided tours, and I haven't had one yet, but I'll be going back on a Saturday sometime soon. But the comment I got from one of the ladies that actually works there was that if it came down to a choice between the shipping industry and generating power, their instructions are the shipping industry gets priority. If they have to shut down the whole Beauharnois Dam, they will do so, providing that the shipping industry gets their water for the locks. It's very important to shipping commerce there. So that's the bigger picture. If it hadn't been for the Ottawa River problem, we wouldn't have had the St. Lawrence River problem. It's the outflow from the Ottawa River into Lake St. Louis that flooded to some degree last year, not seriously. But along that waterfront, on the south shore through Point Claire and that whole section of Montreal, are some of the most expensive houses you can imagine, and they're right on the waterfront. There's the problem. And until communications get set up between IJC and Ontario Hydro and Hydro-Quebec to see what can be done about holding the water back, I do know there's an initiative right now to try to get Lake Ontario down so that when the Ottawa River floods, they've got some reserve capacity here. That's the objective. And of course, the Iroquois Dam was wide open right from June right through till before Christmas. And they've lowered some of the gates now. There's only 8 of them open as of last week because they're trying to get a stable ice cover on the Lake St. Lawrence. I don't think that's going to happen this year. It's just too mild. But that's the objective, to create a solid ice cover, and then they can let more water go through the dam. So that's where it's at right now. There's no easy solution. There's a lot of compromises and a lot of issues besides yours in this room about who gets what water when and what quantity. Any questions?
Thank you. So
I will continue to do my research, by the way. I'm semi-retired and a river rat, so.
So Ian does have some charts at the lobby you could look at afterwards. So I think that wraps up the question and answer session. Or we got one more there? Okay, sorry.
I actually got some first-hand knowledge for you. My name's Rick Eyre. I grew up in Brockville. I was a brat on the river, and now I'm a rat on the river. I live up at Beals Point Road on the water. A year ago, I had the misfortune or fortune to be called back to work up at the Joachim Dam on the Ottawa River. And I was there for 6 months. I was also party to a meeting when the hierarchy came in from Energy Ontario and made the announcement that Ontario Hydro was now in control of all water levels on the Trent Severn, the Rideau, the Ottawa, and all the subsidiaries that were coming into the Ottawa River. And if they wanted to open up, say, Chenot Dam or whatever, all the orders came from Saunders' control room. And I know this from firsthand knowledge from being there at the meeting. And as far as I know right now, they're still doing snow level studies all up the Ottawa Valley for spring runoff, so they know what the water levels are going to be in the spring. And they like to hold back enough water for the summertime air conditioning load in the Ottawa Valley, including Ottawa and probably Mr. Trudeau's office. So I've been sitting here and listening to this, and it's the elephant in the room, and it hasn't been brought out that Ontario Hydro is a partner to all this that's going on, especially, as my friend said, with the Ottawa River in Montreal. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting comment.
Thank you for mentioning hydro, without a doubt. It's, the thing is the issues are so complex that we could literally spend another 8 hours talking about all of the variables and all of the other dams and whatever else. And we try to make it as simple as possible, understand 3 key things, trigger levels, L limits, F limits, right? But without a doubt, there's all of these other complicating factors. It's a highly complex issue, without a doubt. The other comment I just wanted to make was the woman that came up to the mic and said, you know, I really tried to get my friends and neighbors here, and they've said, there's no point. Nothing's going to change. There's no point. Unfortunately, it's one of the things that gets relied on is that eventually we hit a point of fatigue. It's been 3 years. We're going into our 4th, and families are hitting fatigue level. And we do rallies where there should be 700, 800, 900 people, and we've got a good showing. We had over 200 people here tonight. But you ask the question, where is everybody? And I hear all the time that people say, you know, Premier Ford's letter didn't get responded to. Why is my letter going to make any difference? And people aren't writing. And people aren't filling out the surveys. And people aren't going and aren't telling. And the truth is that's when nothing is going to happen. That's when nothing's going to happen. And one of the challenges that I have right now is not just fighting for balance and fighting that everybody understands about Plan 2014 and understands what the ask is, but also fighting public apathy. We've hit this point of apathy. And it's going to take another flood. It'll take another flood, and it looks like we're on the way, right? But it would be really awesome if we got in front of that. And I can tell you that I'm not going to do this much longer. It's been 3 years. My children, I mean, it's been extraordinarily traumatic for all of us. All of us are in therapy, and my child's therapist, my youngest, said to me, you know, your daughter told me her dad died in 2017 and she lost her dad to cancer, and now she feels like she's losing her mom to the flood. That's a wake-up call for me, right? So this is me asking you, go home and write your freaking letters. Write your letters. Keep writing them, right? Remind your local elected officials of what their roles are too. Yes, there's what's expected, but there's also this is not the norm. This is not the norm, and it can't be the norm. We can't treat this like this is going to be allowed as the norm, right? And the only power that we have is with your voices. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Don to close. Thank you.
So in order to close, you need to have thank yous. So my biggest thank you will be to Sarah, and I would appreciate a round of applause for the great work that she's done. Also, I want to appreciate the time and effort that the Brockville Art Center has worked with us to put this event on. They've been great to work with, and you know, Mike Johnson's at the back there. I'd like to recognize him. Robin Hoole's been out in the front office. I'd like to recognize them. So let's give an appreciation for those folks. And then, of course, Bernie, who's our technical expert. He's been working many hours on this as well, so I know he can't hear an applause, but let's pretend that he can. So, and then some help from the other local riparians. We have Isabel, Richard, and Nelson. You know, they've helped put this on as well. So thank you to them. And Dale, I can't see you, but I presume you're back there. He's doing the videotaping and will eventually get it onto YouTube, presumably. So thank you to him. And Doreen Barnes, who helped me with the media releases and getting the word out. I don't know if she's here, but we certainly appreciate her help as well. So we do have a bit of time to socialize and talk and that as we move out into the lobby, so you don't have to rush to leave. And again, I guess the homework, like we talked about, is complete the card, work on the letter campaign, consider donating to the cost recovery, and certainly fill out the social vulnerability and economic survey. So
and thank you to Don, who actually arranged today.
So thank you all for coming. It's a great showing, and we're happy that the event occurred the way it did. Have a good night.